When 12-year-old Luna Grace Stafford crawled under the hood of Benedict Ashworth's broken Rolls-Royce on a dusty Pennsylvania highway, the billionaire CEO expected nothing more than another local mechanic's failed attempt to fix his precision engine. What he didn't expect was for a small girl with grease-stained fingers to diagnose and repair the complex fuel injection system that had stumped 3 certified technicians. But when Ashworth caught sight of the military rings adorning Luna's young hands, her grandfather's Purple Heart, and her fallen father's Marine Corps ring, his world shifted forever, revealing a story of sacrifice, honor, and hidden genius that would challenge everything he believed about worth, respect, and the true meaning of service to one's country. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning sun cast long shadows across Route 412 as Benedict Ashworth's pristine silver Rolls-Royce Phantom came to a sputtering halt on the shoulder of the 2-lane highway. Steam rose from beneath the hood like incense from an altar, carrying with it the acrid smell of overheated metal and expensive failure. Ashworth, dressed in a charcoal grey suit that cost more than most people's monthly salary, stepped out onto the gravel shoulder and stared at his immobilized vehicle with the kind of barely contained fury that only comes from having one's carefully orchestrated schedule completely derailed. "Damn German engineering," he muttered, though he knew perfectly well the Rolls was British. His frustration had little patience for geographical accuracy. The CEO of Ashworth Industries had exactly 47 minutes to reach the Harrisburg Convention Center for a keynote speech to 300 industrial leaders, and his backup driver was currently stuck in traffic 2 hours away. He pulled out his phone, noting with growing irritation that he had only 1 bar of service in this godforsaken stretch of rural Pennsylvania. 3 miles down the road in Stone Harbor, Luna Grace Stafford was already elbow-deep in the engine compartment of a 1987 Chevy pickup, her small hands moving with the practiced confidence of someone who had been raised in the language of carburetors and timing belts. At 12 years old, she stood barely 4 feet 8 inches tall, but her mechanical intuition rivaled technicians with decades of experience. Her grandfather Steele had been teaching her the fundamentals since she could hold a wrench, and what had started as idle curiosity had blossomed into something approaching genius. "Hand me that socket wrench, would you, Luna?" Steele called from beneath a Ford Explorer on the opposite side of Stafford's auto repair. At 68, his voice still carried the crisp authority of his Marine Corps days, though arthritis had begun to slow his movements in ways that frustrated him more than he cared to admit. The 3/8, not the 7/16. Luna reached for the correct tool without looking, her fingers identifying it by touch alone. "Grandpa Steele, I think Mrs. Patterson's alternator is shot, but there's something else wrong too. Listen to how the engine sounds when I rev it." She turned the key and gave the accelerator a gentle pump. The truck responded with an irregular rumble that spoke of deeper issues than a simple electrical problem. "What do you hear?" Steele asked, sliding out from under the Explorer with practiced ease despite his aching joints. His weathered face, marked by decades of Pennsylvania winters and a shrapnel scar that ran from his left temple to his jaw, turned toward his granddaughter with the patient attention he reserved for her mechanical insights. Luna cocked her head, listening to the engine's rhythm like a conductor following a complex symphony. "It's not just the alternator. There's a slight knock that starts when the RPMs hit about 1500. I think the timing chain has stretched maybe 3 or 4 degrees off. And there's a vacuum leak somewhere around the intake manifold." Steele nodded slowly, pride and amazement warring in his expression. In 12 years of life, Luna had absorbed more practical mechanical knowledge than most certified technicians learned in their entire careers. It wasn't just book learning either. She had an intuitive understanding of how engines breathed, how metal expanded and contracted with heat, how the smallest misalignment could cascade into major failure. It was as if she could speak directly to the machines themselves. "You're right on all counts," he said, "but Mrs. Patterson can't afford to fix all that right now. What's the minimum we need to do to get her through the winter?" This was the other lesson Steele had been teaching his granddaughter, the economics of small-town automotive repair. In Stone Harbor, most of their customers were working families, veterans on fixed incomes, and elderly residents who saw a car repair bill as a choice between transportation and groceries. The Stafford family had never gotten rich running an honest garage, but they had earned something more valuable: the respect and trust of their community. "We fix the alternator and adjust the timing chain tension," Luna said without hesitation. "That'll stop the knock and keep the charging system working. The vacuum leak isn't critical yet, but we should tell her to watch for rough idling in cold weather." Steele smiled, the expression transforming his gruff features. "That's my girl, always thinking about the customer first." He was about to say more when the sound of an expensive car engine in distress reached their ears from the direction of Route 412. Both Staffords paused, their trained ears automatically analyzing the distinctive sound of automotive failure. "Sounds like a fuel delivery problem," Luna observed. "Something big and expensive, judging by the engine note." Steele wiped his hands on a shop rag and glanced toward the highway. "Could be. Want to take the tow truck and see if someone needs help?" It was a rhetorical question. The Stafford family had never turned away a stranded motorist, regardless of their ability to pay. 10 minutes later, Luna sat in the passenger seat of their aging Ford tow truck as Steele navigated the short drive to Route 412. The truck's radio crackled with local traffic, mostly farmers and small business owners coordinating their daily routines. Stone Harbor operated on the rhythms of a community where everyone knew everyone else, where favors were repaid with casseroles and borrowed tools, where reputation mattered more than profit margins. They found the Rolls-Royce exactly where the distressed engine sounds had suggested, pulled onto the shoulder with its hood raised like a surrender flag. Benedict Ashworth stood beside his vehicle, phone pressed to his ear, his voice carrying the sharp edge of a man accustomed to having his problems solved immediately and efficiently. "I don't care what it costs," he was saying. "I need a tow truck and a rental car within the next 30 minutes, or I'm going to miss the most important presentation of my career." He paused, listening to whatever response he was receiving. "What do you mean the nearest luxury rental is in Philadelphia? This is America, not some third-world country." Steele parked the tow truck and approached with the measured courtesy of someone who had dealt with frustrated motorists for decades. Luna followed a few steps behind, her sharp eyes already taking in the details of the disabled Rolls-Royce. The car was maybe 2 years old, she estimated, with the kind of meticulous maintenance that came from unlimited resources and professional care, which made its current predicament all the more interesting. "Morning," Steele said, touching the brim of his baseball cap in a gesture that managed to be both respectful and subtly ironic. "Looks like you're having some trouble. I'm Steele Stafford from Stafford's Auto Repair, and this is my granddaughter Luna. We heard your engine from our shop." Ashworth ended his phone call with obvious irritation and turned to face them. His first impression was dismissive. A grizzled old mechanic and a child, neither of whom looked capable of understanding the sophisticated engineering of a Rolls-Royce Phantom. "I appreciate the offer," he said, his tone suggesting the opposite. "But this isn't exactly the kind of vehicle you'd typically work on. I need a specialist, someone familiar with precision German engineering. British, actually," Luna said quietly. "Rolls-Royce has been British since 1906, though BMW owns the name now. And the engine in a Phantom is based on BMW's N74 V12, but Rolls modifies it pretty extensively for smoothness and refinement." Ashworth looked down at her with surprise, as if a piece of furniture had suddenly started speaking. "Excuse me?" Steele suppressed a smile. "Luna knows her cars. All kinds of cars. Why don't you tell us what happened?" "The engine just died," Ashworth said, his attention still mostly focused on Luna with a mixture of curiosity and skepticism. "No warning, no unusual sounds. One moment I was cruising at 70, the next moment I'm coasting to a stop with nothing but dashboard warning lights." Luna walked over to the rolls and leaned into the engine compartment, her hands moving carefully but confidently among the complex maze of hoses, wires, and precision components. She had never worked on a Phantom before, but engines were engines, and the fundamental principles remained the same, regardless of the badge on the front. "Did you fuel up recently?" she asked, her voice slightly muffled by the engine bay. "About 50 miles ago," Ashworth replied. "At some no-name station in the middle of nowhere." Luna nodded, continuing her examination. "And the engine died all at once, or did it sputter first?" "All at once, like someone flipped a switch." She spent another few minutes tracing fuel lines and checking connections, her small hands able to reach places that would have challenged larger mechanics. Finally, she straightened up and turned to face Ashworth with the serious expression of someone delivering a professional diagnosis. "Your high-pressure fuel pump failed," she announced. "The low-pressure pump in the tank is still working. That's why you're not getting a complete fuel system failure warning. But the high-pressure pump that feeds the direct injection system is dead. Without it, the engine can't maintain the pressure needed for proper fuel delivery." Ashworth stared at her for a long moment. "That's quite specific. How can you be sure?" "Because I can hear the low-pressure pump priming when we turn the key, but there's no pressure buildup in the rail. Plus, this symptom pattern, sudden failure with no warning, is classic for high-pressure pump failure in direct injection engines. It's actually a known issue with some BMW V12s, though Rolls doesn't like to advertise that fact." Steele watched his granddaughter with quiet pride. At 12 years old, she had just diagnosed a problem that would have taken most dealership technicians an hour of computer diagnostics to identify. More importantly, she had done it by listening, touching, and understanding the language that machines spoke to those who knew how to hear them. "So what's the solution?" Ashworth asked, though his tone had shifted from dismissive to genuinely curious. "Normally, you'd need to replace the pump," Luna said. "But that's a dealer-only part, probably $1,000 plus labor, and you'd be looking at 3 or 4 days just to get it shipped here." "Normally." Ashworth caught the implication in her words. Luna glanced at her grandfather, who nodded almost imperceptibly. "There's a temporary fix," she said, "if you're willing to trust a 12-year-old with your very expensive car." For the first time since his breakdown, Benedict Ashworth smiled. Not the practiced smile of corporate boardrooms, but something approaching genuine humor. "Young lady, at this point I'm willing to trust anyone who can tell me what's wrong with my car. What did you have in mind?" What Luna had in mind would require tools, creativity, and a willingness to think beyond the constraints of authorized repair procedures. It would also reveal capabilities that would force Benedict Ashworth to reconsider his assumptions about worth, intelligence, and the kind of people who deserved his respect. As she began explaining her plan, neither of them realized that this chance encounter on a Pennsylvania highway would set in motion events that would change both their lives in ways they could never have imagined. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Luna's plan required a trip back to Stafford's Auto Repair, where she gathered an assortment of tools that made Ashworth question whether he was about to witness mechanical genius or expensive destruction. She returned with a digital multimeter, a small electric fuel pump from a salvaged Honda Civic, 20, feet of high-pressure fuel line, and various adapters that seemed impossibly small for the task at hand. "The temporary pump won't handle the full pressure your Rolls needs," she explained as she laid out her tools on a clean shop cloth beside the car. "But if I wire it in parallel with your existing low-pressure system and route it through the engine bay, it should provide enough supplemental pressure to get you to your destination." Ashworth watched with growing fascination as Luna began her work. Her movements were economical and precise, each action serving a specific purpose in her overall strategy. She tested voltage at various points in the fuel system, traced wiring harnesses with the confidence of someone reading a familiar map, and began fashioning connections with a skill that seemed impossible for someone who needed a step stool to reach most engine components. "Where did you learn to do this?" he asked as Luna carefully spliced into the car's electrical system. "Grandpa Steele taught me," she replied, without looking up from her work. "But mostly I just listen to what the cars are trying to tell me. They all want the same things: proper fuel delivery, clean air, good spark timing, and enough compression to do their job. The fancy parts are just different ways of accomplishing the same basic goals." Steele stood nearby, ready to assist, but careful not to interfere with Luna's process. He had learned over the years that his granddaughter worked best when allowed to follow her instincts, even when her methods seemed unconventional. "Luna's been taking apart engines since she was 8, he told Ashworth. "Started with lawn mowers and worked her way up to trucks. This is her first Rolls-Royce, but the principles are the same." 8 years old? Ashworth shook his head in disbelief. "Most 8-year-olds are playing video games." "Luna's never owned a video game," Steele said. "After her father died, she needed something to keep her hands and mind busy. Turned out she had a natural gift for understanding how things work." The mention of Luna's father created a momentary silence that hung heavy in the morning air. Ashworth sensed there was more to that story, but something in Steele's expression suggested it wasn't a topic for casual conversation. Instead, he focused on Luna's work, watching as she ran new fuel lines through the engine compartment with the patience of a surgeon and the creativity of an artist. 20 minutes later, Luna had created what could only be described as automotive genius. An elegant bypass system that rerouted fuel flow through her improvised pump while maintaining all the safety protocols of the original design. She had even incorporated a manual override switch that would allow the driver to disengage the system if problems arose. "Try starting it now," she said, wiping her hands on a shop rag that was already stained with years of honest work. Ashworth slid behind the wheel of his Rolls-Royce, turned the key, and felt the familiar smooth rumble of 12 cylinders coming to life. The engine ran perfectly, its sophisticated computer systems apparently satisfied with Luna's creative solution to their fuel delivery problem. "Remarkable," he said, stepping out of the car with an expression of genuine amazement. "How long will this fix last?" "Should get you wherever you need to go today," Luna replied. "Maybe longer if you drive carefully and don't push the engine too hard. But you'll still need to get the real pump replaced when you have time." For the first time since his breakdown, Ashworth checked his watch and realized he might actually make his presentation. "Young lady, you may have just saved my company a very important contract." He reached for his wallet, preparing to offer payment that would reflect both his gratitude and his assumption about appropriate compensation for such service. "How much do I owe you?" he asked, pulling out several $100 bills. Steele stepped forward before Luna could respond. "Standard diagnostic and temporary repair comes to $65, he said firmly. "Luna's time and expertise aren't for sale at any price, but the work she does under my shop's license follows our posted rates." Ashworth looked from Steele to Luna and back again, clearly struggling with the concept that such valuable service could be priced so modestly. In his world, specialized knowledge commanded premium rates, and what Luna had just accomplished would have cost thousands at any dealership. $65 seems insufficient, he said carefully. Surely exceptional work deserves exceptional compensation. Exceptional work is just what we do here, Steele replied with quiet dignity. We don't charge extra for doing our job right. Luna had been watching this exchange with interest, studying Ashworth's face as he processed the unfamiliar concept of service performed for its own sake rather than maximum profit. Something about his expression reminded her of the executives who occasionally visited Stone Harbor's small manufacturing plants, men who measured value exclusively in financial terms and struggled to understand motivations that couldn't be reduced to quarterly earnings reports. Besides, she added with a slight smile, Grandpa Steele says the best payment for good work is knowing someone got where they needed to go safely. Ashworth accepted the change from his $100 bill with the bemused expression of someone whose worldview had just been gently but firmly challenged. He looked down at Luna, taking in details he had missed during the crisis of his breakdown. The precision of her movements, the confidence in her voice, the way she carried herself with quiet competence that had nothing to do with age or size. It was then that he noticed the rings. Luna wore 2 rings on a thin chain around her neck, visible now that she had bent forward to collect her tools. They were clearly military. One bore the distinctive eagle, globe, and anchor of the Marine Corps, while the other displayed the purple ribbon and profile that marked it as a Purple Heart. Both were too large for her young hands, obviously meant for someone else, someone whose absence was marked by their presence around her granddaughter's neck. "Those are beautiful rings," Ashworth said softly, his voice carrying a note of respect that hadn't been there before. Luna's hand moved instinctively to the chain, her fingers touching the metal with the reverence of someone holding sacred objects. "They were my father's," she said simply. "Lieutenant Jake Stafford, 1st Battalion, 8th Marines. He died in Afghanistan when I was 7. The words hit Ashworth like a physical blow. In his world of corporate mergers and profit margins, military service was an abstract concept, something that happened to other people's children in distant places that existed primarily as geopolitical talking points. But here, standing in front of him, was the human cost of those distant conflicts, a 12-year-old girl whose mechanical genius had been shaped by loss, whose quiet confidence masked a grief too large for childhood to contain. "I'm sorry," he said, and for once his words carried no calculation, no professional polish, just simple human recognition of profound loss. He was a good Marine, Steele added, his voice rough with emotion he rarely allowed others to see. Died. Trying to save his squad from an improvised explosive device. Could have stayed in cover, but that wasn't Jake's way. The Purple Heart was for wounds he received 2 months before his final deployment. He insisted on going back. Luna continued organizing her tools with practiced efficiency, but Ashworth could see the subtle tension in her shoulders, the way her movements became slightly more deliberate when discussing her father. This was clearly familiar territory, a story told many times to many people, but never without cost. The Marine Corps ring was his graduation gift from boot camp, she continued. He wore it every day for 8 years. Grandpa Steele says, when I'm old enough to enlist, I can choose which service I want, but the rings will always remind me what real service looks like. When you're old enough to enlist, Ashworth repeated. You're planning a military career? Luna looked up at him with the serious expression of someone whose life had been shaped by purposes larger than personal ambition. My family has served in every American conflict since World War I. Great-great-grandfather in France, great-grandfather in the Pacific, Grandpa Steele in Vietnam, and my father in Afghanistan. It's what Staffords do. Steele watched his granddaughter. with a mixture of pride and worry that Ashworth was beginning to understand. Here was a child whose extraordinary talents could take her anywhere in the world, yet she was already committed to a path of service that would likely place her in harm's way before her 20th birthday. "That's quite a legacy," Ashworth said carefully, "but surely someone with your mechanical abilities would have other options." "Options aren't the point," Luna replied with the matter-of-fact certainty of someone whose values had been forged in loss and tempered by love. "My father could have been anything he wanted to. Grandpa Steele says he had job offers from 3 engineering firms when he graduated college. But he chose to serve first." Ashworth found himself looking at this small girl with new eyes, seeing not just mechanical talent, but a depth of character that made his own accomplishments seem somehow less significant. In his world, success was measured by quarterly earnings and market share. In Luna's world, success was measured by service to others, regardless of personal cost. "Well," he said finally, "your country will be fortunate to have someone with your abilities." "Maybe," Luna said, securing the last of her tools, "but first I have a lot to learn. Grandpa Steele says mechanical skills are just tools. What matters is having the wisdom to use them for the right reasons." As Ashworth prepared to leave Stone Harbor and continue his journey to Harrisburg, he realized that this brief encounter had shown him something he hadn't expected to find on a rural Pennsylvania highway. Genuine nobility, not the manufactured version that came with wealth and position, but the authentic character that emerged from loss, service, and the quiet determination to make a difference in the world. He had come to Stone Harbor as a stranded motorist seeking automotive repair. He was leaving as someone who had witnessed a form of excellence that couldn't be purchased, couldn't be manufactured, and couldn't be faked. For the first time in years, Benedict Ashworth found himself wondering whether his own definition of success was sufficient for the life he was actually living. Benedict Ashworth made it to Harrisburg with 15 minutes to spare, delivered his presentation flawlessly, and closed the largest industrial contract in his company's history. But as he drove back towards Stone Harbor 3 days later in a rental car, his Rolls having been towed to a BMW dealership for proper repairs, his thoughts weren't on profit margins or quarterly projections. They were on a 12-year-old girl whose quiet competence had revealed the hollowness of his own achievements. The dealership service manager had confirmed Luna's diagnosis with obvious amazement. "Whoever figured out your fuel pump failure knows their business," he had told Ashworth. "Most of our certified technicians would have needed computer diagnostics to isolate that problem. And this temporary repair system is actually brilliant, maintains all safety protocols while providing adequate pressure. We've never seen anything like it." Now, as Ashworth navigated the familiar route back to Stone Harbor, he carried with him more than just curiosity about the remarkable child who had saved his presentation. He carried a growing sense that his encounter with the Stafford family had exposed something fundamental missing from his own life, a sense of purpose that extended beyond personal accumulation. Meanwhile, Luna was discovering that her brief fame as the girl who fixed a Rolls-Royce was spreading through Stone Harbor with the speed that only small-town gossip could achieve. Amparo Ruiz had heard about it from her morning coffee customers at the diner. Pastor Keith Harper had mentioned it during Wednesday evening service, and even Judge Carol Armstrong had called Steele to express her amazement at Luna's mechanical prowess. "Whole town's talking about you fixing that fancy car," Alejandro Contreras said as he helped Luna rebuild a transmission on Thursday afternoon. At 16, Alejandro was technically Luna's supervisor in the shop hierarchy, but he had long since accepted that his 12-year-old colleague possessed knowledge that he was still struggling to acquire. "It wasn't that complicated," Luna replied. Her attention focused on the intricate arrangement of gears and clutches spread across her workbench. Just a matter of understanding what the engine needed and finding a way to provide it. Steele emerged from his office carrying a clipboard and wearing the expression of someone dealing with unwelcome complications. "Luna, we need to talk," he said. "I just got off the phone with someone from Child Protective Services." Luna looked up from the transmission, immediately alert to the serious tone in her grandfather's voice. "What did they want?" "Seems someone filed a report questioning whether a 12-year-old should be working on automotive systems," Steele said carefully. "They want to schedule a home visit to assess your living situation and educational arrangements." The implications hit Luna like a physical blow. Since her father's death 5 years earlier, she had lived with Steele in the small apartment above the auto shop, attending Stone Harbor Elementary during the school year and spending her afternoons and summers learning mechanical trades in the garage below. It was an unconventional arrangement, perhaps, but it had provided her with stability, love, and an education that no traditional curriculum could match. "Can they take me away?" she asked, the usual confidence in her voice replaced by something much more vulnerable. "Not if I can help it," Steele replied firmly, "but we'll need to show them that you're being properly cared for and educated. They're particularly concerned about you working with tools and chemicals that they consider dangerous for a child." Alejandro stopped his own work and turned to face them. "That's crazy," he said with the indignation of someone who had witnessed Luna's safety practices firsthand. "Luna's more careful with shop procedures than half the certified mechanics I know." Steele nodded grimly. "Unfortunately, bureaucrats don't always understand the difference between proper training and neglect. The investigator is coming Monday morning, and she'll want to interview Luna, inspect our living quarters, and review her academic progress." Luna felt a familiar tightness in her chest, the same feeling she had experienced in the months following her father's death, when every aspect of her life seemed uncertain and beyond her control. She had found stability and purpose in the rhythms of the auto shop, in the logic of mechanical problems and solutions. The thought of being separated from Steele and forced into some institutional care arrangement filled her with a dread that went beyond simple fear. "What do we need to do?" she asked, forcing her voice back to its usual steadiness. "First, we document everything," Steele said. "Your school records, your mechanical training, the safety protocols we follow, the community support we have. Then we make sure our living space meets their standards for cleanliness and child welfare." That evening, as Luna sat at the kitchen table working on her algebra homework while Steele prepared for the inspection, neither of them noticed the black sedan that had been parked across the street for the past 2 hours. Inside the vehicle, Detective Dawn Fisher was conducting her own investigation, not into Luna's welfare, but into the circumstances surrounding the Child Protective Services report. Fisher had been a police officer in Stone Harbor for 12 years, and she knew the Stafford family well. Steele was a respected community member whose military service and honest business practices had earned him widespread trust. Luna was known throughout the town as a polite, intelligent child whose mechanical abilities had helped numerous residents with automotive problems they couldn't afford to have professionally diagnosed. The timing of the CPS report, filed anonymously just 3 days after Luna's successful repair of a wealthy businessman's luxury car, struck Fisher as suspiciously coincidental. She had learned over the years to distrust anonymous complaints that arrived without corroborating evidence, particularly when they targeted families who lacked the resources to mount effective legal defenses. Her investigation had revealed that the report originated from a phone call made from a Philadelphia area code, describing concerns about a young child performing dangerous mechanical work without proper supervision or safety equipment. The caller had claimed to be a concerned citizen who had witnessed Luna working on automotive systems, but had refused to provide contact information or specific details about the alleged safety violations. Friday morning brought unexpected support. From a quarter Luna hadn't anticipated, Dr. Paula Bishop arrived at Stafford's Auto Repair, carrying a folder of medical records and wearing the determined expression of someone prepared to fight bureaucratic windmills. "I heard about the CPS investigation," she told Steele without preamble. "I've brought Luna's complete medical history, including documentation of her regular checkups, vaccinations, and the psychological evaluations I conducted after her father's death." Dr. Bishop had been Luna's pediatrician since birth, and her records painted a picture of a healthy, well-cared-for child whose emotional development had progressed normally despite the trauma of losing her father. More importantly, her documentation included detailed notes about Luna's mechanical activities, which she had consistently described as therapeutic and developmentally appropriate. "The medical evidence supports Luna's continued placement with you," Dr. Bishop told Steele. "Her psychological profiles show a child who has processed her grief in healthy ways, formed secure attachments, and developed age-appropriate independence skills. The mechanical work she does isn't exploitation. It's a constructive outlet that has helped her build confidence and purpose." Luna listened to this conversation with mixed emotions. She appreciated Dr. Bishop's support, but the clinical language reduced her life to a series of evaluation criteria that seemed to miss the essential truth. She and Steele were family, and their unconventional household worked because it was built on love, respect, and shared values. That afternoon, as Luna worked on replacing brake pads for Pastor Harper's aging Buick, she heard the distinctive sound of an expensive engine pulling into the shop's parking area. She looked up to see a silver Rolls-Royce Phantom, not the same one she had repaired, but clearly from the same automotive family, followed by a black SUV with tinted windows. Benedict Ashworth stepped out of the Rolls, but he wasn't alone. With him was a woman in her 30s, wearing a professional suit and carrying a leather briefcase that suggested legal rather than mechanical business. Behind them, two men in dark suits emerged from the SUV with the measured movements of private security personnel. "Good afternoon, Luna," Ashworth said as he approached her workstation. "I hope you don't mind the intrusion, but I've brought someone I'd like you to meet. This is Monica Ashworth, my daughter. She's a social worker specializing in child welfare cases." Luna straightened up from her work, immediately sensing that this visit was connected to the CPS investigation. Monica Ashworth had the careful observational skills of someone trained to assess family dynamics and child welfare, and she was clearly taking detailed mental notes about Luna's work environment and demeanor. "Miss Stafford," Monica said with professional courtesy, "my father has told me quite a lot about your mechanical abilities. I understand you're facing some challenges with social services regarding your living arrangement. Word travels fast. In small towns," Luna replied carefully, unsure of Monica's intentions or allegiances. "Actually, word travels fast in certain professional circles," Monica corrected. "I've made some inquiries about your case, and I'm concerned that someone may be using the system to target your family for reasons that have nothing to do with your welfare." Steele emerged from the office, his expression shifting from wariness to cautious optimism as he processed the implications of Monica's statement. "You think someone filed a false report?" "I think someone filed a report based on assumptions rather than facts," Monica said diplomatically. "I've reviewed the initial complaint, and it doesn't match the reality I'm observing here. Luna appears healthy, confident, and well supervised. Her work environment meets or exceeds safety standards for youth apprenticeship programs, and her grandfather clearly provides appropriate care and guidance." Benedict watched this exchange, with growing understanding of why he had felt compelled to return to Stone Harbor. His daughter's professional assessment confirmed his own intuitive sense that the Stafford family represented something authentic and valuable, the kind of principled life that his own wealth and success had somehow failed to provide. The question, Monica continued, is whether we can identify who made the report and what their real motivations might be. Because if this is harassment disguised as child welfare concern, there are legal remedies available. For the first time since learning about the CPS investigation, Luna felt a spark of hope. But she also sensed that this unexpected alliance with the Ashworth family was about to reveal complications she hadn't anticipated. Complications that would test not only her mechanical abilities, but her understanding of justice, power, and the price of standing up for what was right. The answer to Monica Ashworth's question about who had filed the CPS report came from an unexpected source Saturday evening. Clutch Motor. Jenkins arrived at Steele's apartment carrying a six-pack of beer and a troubled expression that spoke of moral conflict rather than mechanical problems. "Steele, we need to talk," Clutch said, settling into a kitchen chair that creaked under his substantial frame, and Luna should hear this too. Luna looked up from her homework, a report on the Industrial Revolution that seemed almost quaint compared to the very real industrial conflicts swirling around her own life. Something in Clutch's voice suggested that whatever he had to say would be more significant than her assignment on steam engines and textile mills. "You know, I've been doing some weekend work for Ashworth Industries," Clutch began carefully. "Maintenance on their heavy equipment, some consulting on their fleet management. Good money, and they've always paid on time." Steele nodded. Clutch had mentioned the side work several months earlier, proud to have landed a contract with one of the region's major employers. In a town like Stone Harbor, where steady work was precious and industrial jobs were disappearing, any connection to a successful company was worth maintaining. "Well, yesterday I was at their main facility doing some preventive maintenance when I overheard a conversation I probably wasn't supposed to hear," Clutch continued, "between two corporate security guys and some woman from their legal department." Luna set aside her homework, sensing that this conversation was about to become much more important than her academic obligations. "What kind of conversation?" "They were talking about you," Clutch said directly. "Specifically, they were discussing whether the situation with the Stafford girl had been adequately contained." The words hung in the kitchen air like smoke from an electrical fire, acrid and dangerous. Steele's jaw tightened with the controlled anger of someone whose family had been threatened by forces they couldn't directly confront. "Contained how?" Steele asked, though his tone suggested he already suspected the answer. "The legal woman, I think her name was Bailey or something like that, was saying that Mr. Ashworth's public association with a child laborer could create liability issues for the company. She mentioned that anonymous reports to appropriate agencies were sometimes necessary to protect corporate interests." Luna felt a cold certainty settle in her stomach. "They called Child Protective Services." "That's what it sounded like to me," Clutch confirmed. "The woman was particularly concerned about photos or videos of you working on that Rolls-Royce. Said it could be used by labor activists or competitors to suggest that Ashworth Industries endorsed unsafe working conditions for miners." Steele stood up abruptly, pacing to the window that overlooked the shop below. "So they decided to destroy a 12-year-old's life to protect their public relations." "There's more," Clutch said reluctantly. "They were also discussing ways to encourage local contractors to reconsider their associations with businesses that might reflect poorly on Ashworth Industries' commitment to proper labor practices." The implications of that statement struck Luna like a physical blow. Ashworth Industries held significant influence over Stone Harbor's economy through their contracts with local suppliers, maintenance providers, and service companies. If they chose to use that influence to pressure businesses into avoiding Stafford's auto repair, they could effectively destroy Steele's livelihood within months. "They're going after the shop too," Luna said, her voice barely above a whisper. "They're covering all their bases," Clutch agreed grimly. "Corporate reputation management, they called it. Making sure that Mr. Ashworth's momentary lapse in judgment doesn't create long-term problems for the company." Steele returned to the table, his expression grim but determined. "Did you recognize any of the people having this conversation?" "The legal woman I'd never seen before, but one of the security guys was Garrett Powell. Used to be Army, I think. Seemed uncomfortable with the whole discussion, if that matters." Luna remembered Garrett Powell from Monica Ashworth's brief introduction, Benedict's, who head of security, who had accompanied him to the shop. The fact that he had seemed uncomfortable with the corporate strategy suggested that not everyone in the Ashworth organization supported the decision to target her family. "What are we going to do?" Luna asked, though she was already beginning to formulate her own ideas about how to respond to this threat. "First, we document everything Clutch just told us," Steele said. "Then we call Detective Fisher and let her know what we've learned. If Ashworth Industries is using false reports to harass private citizens, that's a crime." And then, Luna pressed. Steele looked at his granddaughter with the same expression he had worn when explaining military strategy during their evening discussions about her father's service. "Then we fight back, but we do it smart, and we do it right." Sunday morning brought an unexpected congregation to Sacred Heart Community Church. Pastor Keith Harper's usual attendance of 67 had swelled to nearly twice that number, with many faces that rarely appeared in pews showing up to hear what had become known throughout Stone Harbor as the Stafford situation. Luna sat in her customary third-row seat, acutely aware of the whispered conversations and sideways glances that marked her as the center of community attention. She had attended this church since childhood, but today felt different, charged with the kind of tension that preceded either revival or rebellion. Pastor Harper's sermon that morning focused on the biblical story of David and Goliath, but his contemporary applications were hardly subtle. "Sometimes," he said from the pulpit, "the biggest threats to our community come from those who have the most power to help it. And sometimes the greatest courage comes from the smallest among us." After the service, Luna found herself surrounded by neighbors and friends offering support that ranged from practical to passionate. Mrs. Patterson promised to provide character references for the CPS investigation. Tom Rodriguez, Alejandro's father, offered to testify about Luna's positive influence on his son's mechanical education. Even Judge Carol Armstrong, attending church for the first time in months, made a point of speaking with Steele about legal resources available to families facing administrative harassment. "The law is supposed to protect children, not persecute them," Judge Armstrong told Steele as the congregation filed out into the autumn sunshine. "If corporations are manipulating social services to silence inconvenient citizens, that's a violation of civil rights that goes far beyond child welfare concerns." But it was the conversation Luna overheard between two men near the church parking lot that provided the most significant intelligence about their situation. She recognized one voice as belonging to Earl Patterson, who worked in Ashworth Industries' Facilities Management Department. "Powell's been asking questions about the Stafford report," Patterson was saying. "Wants to know who authorized it and why he wasn't consulted about the security implications." "Garrett's always been straight," the other man replied. "If he's pushing back on this, maybe there's more going on than we know." Luna filed this information away for later consideration. If Garrett Powell was indeed questioning the corporate strategy against her family, he might represent an opportunity for alliance, or at least intelligence gathering. Monday morning arrived with the inevitability of weather, unwelcome but unavoidable. The CPS investigator, a thin woman named Sandra Mitchell, who carried herself with the defensive authority of someone accustomed to being disliked, arrived at Stafford's Auto Repair at exactly 9 o'clock. "I'll need to interview Luna privately," Mitchell announced, before even introducing herself properly. "Standard protocol requires that children be able to speak without potential intimidation from guardians." Steele's jaw tightened, but he nodded his agreement. "Luna, why don't you show Ms. Mitchell around the shop first, then take her upstairs for your conversation?" Luna led the investigator through the auto repair facility, explaining safety protocols and pointing out the protective equipment required for different types of work. Mitchell took copious notes, but asked few questions. Her attention focused more on documenting potential violations than understanding actual practices. "This seems like a dangerous environment for a child," Mitchell observed as they passed the welding station. "I'm not allowed to use the welding equipment without supervision," Luna replied. "And I always wear proper protective gear when I'm in the shop during welding operations. Grandpa Steele taught me that safety comes before everything else." Nevertheless, exposure to industrial chemicals and mechanical hazards raises serious concerns about appropriate child supervision. Luna bit back her initial response, which would have involved a detailed explanation of how her training exceeded the safety knowledge of most adult workers. Instead, she simply nodded and continued the tour. The interview itself lasted 45 minutes and covered everything from Luna's academic progress to her social relationships to her long-term career goals. Mitchell's questions were professional, but carried an underlying assumption that Luna's current situation was inherently problematic, that any deviation from conventional childhood required justification and remediation. "Do you ever feel pressured to work in the auto shop?" Mitchell asked. "No, ma'am," Luna replied honestly. "I work there because I love it and because I'm good at it. Grandpa Steele never makes me do anything I don't want to do." "But don't you think children your age should be playing with friends instead of working with dangerous tools?" Luna considered the question carefully. "I have friends," she said, "and I do things that other kids do. But I also have responsibilities and skills that help my family and my community. I don't think there's anything wrong with that." Mitchell made more notes, her expression revealing nothing about her assessment of Luna's responses. "What would you say if I told you that some people are concerned about your welfare?" "I'd say they don't know me or my family very well," Luna replied with quiet dignity. "And I'd wonder why they're more concerned about me working in a safe, supervised environment than they are about kids who don't have families who care about them at all." It was a response that revealed both Luna's intelligence and her understanding of the broader implications of the investigation. She wasn't just defending her own situation, she was challenging the premise that her unconventional childhood represented a problem requiring official intervention. When Mitchell finally departed, promising a written report within 10 days, Luna and Steele were left with the familiar uncertainty that accompanies bureaucratic processes. They had presented their best case, documented their practices, and demonstrated their commitment to Luna's welfare. Now they could only wait and hope that evidence and character would prove stronger than anonymous accusations and corporate influence. But Luna had no intention of waiting passively for others to determine her fate. As she watched Mitchell's car disappear down the street, she was already formulating a plan that would require courage, creativity, and a willingness to confront power with truth, qualities that her father's rings reminded her were worth any risk. Luna's plan began with a phone call she wasn't supposed to make to a person she wasn't supposed to know how to contact. Tuesday evening, while Steele attended a veterans meeting at the American Legion Hall, she used the shop's computer to research Ashworth Industries' corporate structure until she found what she was looking for: Garrett Powell's direct office. "Number, Mr. Powell," she said when the call connected. "This is Luna Stafford. I think we need to talk." There was a long pause before Powell responded, and Luna could hear the careful calculation in his voice when he finally spoke. "Miss Stafford, I'm not sure it's appropriate for me to—" "Mr. Powell," Luna interrupted with the quiet authority she had learned from watching Steele handle difficult customers. "I know you overheard the conversation about my family on Friday, and I know you were uncomfortable with what you heard. I'm calling because I think you're a decent person who got caught up in something that isn't decent at all." Another pause, longer this time. "What makes you think I would help you?" "Because Clutch Jenkins says you served in the army," Luna replied, "and because when my father died in Afghanistan, his commanding officer told my grandfather that good soldiers protect people who can't protect themselves. I'm hoping you're still a good soldier." Powell's exhale was audible through the phone. "Where do you want to meet?" An hour later, Luna sat across from Garrett Powell in a corner booth at Martinez Family Diner, the late evening quiet broken only by the soft conversation of a few truckers and the distant sound of Amparo cleaning the kitchen. Powell looked uncomfortable, not with the location, but with the moral complexity of the situation he found himself navigating. "I want you to understand something first," he said, stirring sugar into coffee he clearly didn't want. "I work for Ashworth Industries. They pay my salary, provide my health insurance, and fund my daughter's college education. Anything I tell you could cost me my job." Luna nodded gravely. "I understand. But I also think you understand that what they're doing to my family is wrong." "It's more complicated than wrong," Powell said carefully. "It's corporate risk management taken to an extreme that I find personally distasteful. But distasteful isn't the same as illegal. Filing false reports with Child Protective Services isn't illegal?" Powell winced. "The reports weren't technically false. They were strategically interpreted. Your situation does involve a miner working with industrial equipment, which could be construed as a safety concern by someone motivated to see it that way." Luna felt a flash of anger, but forced herself to remain calm. "So they found a way to use the system against us that's technically legal but completely dishonest." "That's a fair assessment," Powell agreed. "And it's why I'm sitting here talking to you instead of pretending this conversation never happened." Luna leaned forward, her young face serious in the diner's fluorescent lighting. "What can you tell me about their plans? Are they really going to pressure local businesses to stop working with my grandfather?" Powell hesitated, clearly wrestling with competing loyalties. "The legal department has prepared a list of contractors and suppliers who might be encouraged to reconsider their associations with businesses that could reflect poorly on Ashworth Industries' reputation." "How many businesses?" "Enough to matter," Powell said grimly. "Your grandfather's shop isn't the only target. Anyone who publicly supports your family could find their contracts under review." The scope of the threat hit Luna like a physical blow. This wasn't just about her and Steele. It was about intimidating an entire community into silence through economic pressure. "They're trying to isolate us. They're trying to make this problem disappear quietly," Powell corrected. "Corporate strategy assumes that most people will choose economic security over principle when forced to make that choice." Luna thought about the faces she had seen in church Sunday morning, the neighbors who had offered support without understanding the potential cost of that support. What if they're wrong about that assumption? Powell studied her with the appraising look of someone recognizing unexpected depth. "Miss Stafford, are you asking me that question as someone seeking information or as someone planning something?" "Both," Luna said honestly. Powell was quiet for a long moment, his fingers drumming against his coffee cup in a rhythm that spoke of internal conflict. "There's something else you should know," he said finally. "Benedict Ashworth doesn't know about the CPS report or the pressure campaign. His legal department initiated both actions without his direct authorization." Luna blinked in surprise. "He doesn't know. Rhonda Bailey has authority to manage reputational risks without executive approval for routine matters. She classified your situation as routine risk management." "Routine?" Luna's voice rose slightly before she caught herself. "To her, yes. Bailey sees this as a standard corporate hygiene issue. Eliminate a potential public relations problem before it becomes a liability. She's handled dozens of similar situations involving environmental activists, labor organizers, and community advocates who posed theoretical threats to company image." Luna absorbed this information with growing understanding of how corporate power actually operated. It wasn't necessarily malicious. It was systematic, treating human lives as variables in risk assessment algorithms. In some ways, that was even more frightening than deliberate cruelty. "So if Mr. Ashworth knew what his legal department was doing," she began. "I can't speak for Mr. Ashworth's potential reactions," Powell said carefully, "but I can tell you that he's been asking questions about community relations lately, questions that suggest his priorities might be shifting." "What kind of questions?" Powell glanced around the diner, confirming that their conversation remained private. "Questions about whether our corporate policies align with our stated values. Questions about the long-term wisdom of viewing community relationships as transactional rather than collaborative." Luna felt a spark of possibility. "He's having second thoughts about how his company operates." "He's having thoughts," Powell corrected. "Whether they'll translate into action depends on factors I can't predict." Luna stood up, her mind already racing ahead to the next phase of her plan. "Mr. Powell, if someone hypothetically wanted to make sure Mr. Ashworth learned about what his legal department was doing, how might that hypothetically happen?" Powell almost smiled. "Hypothetically, Mr. Ashworth reviews all significant legal actions during his weekly briefings on Friday mornings, and hypothetically, someone might ensure that this week's briefing includes comprehensive documentation of recent risk management initiatives. And hypothetically, if someone wanted to attend that briefing to provide additional context about those initiatives. That would be significantly more complicated," Powell said, "but not impossible, if someone were creative and determined enough." Luna extended her hand across the table. "Thank you for your honesty, Mr. Powell, and for remembering what good soldiers are supposed to do." Powell shook her hand, his expression mixing admiration with concern. "Miss Stafford, whatever you're planning, please be careful. Corporate power doesn't like to be challenged directly, especially by people without institutional protection." "I understand," Luna said, "but sometimes doing the right thing means accepting some risk." Wednesday morning brought news that confirmed Luna's growing understanding of her family's precarious situation. Steele returned from his coffee run with a grim expression and a conversation that had clearly disturbed him. "Earl Patterson just gave me a heads up," Steele told Luna as she worked, "on adjusting the carburetor in a 1995 Chevrolet pickup. His supervisor at Ashworth Industries asked him some pointed questions about his relationship with local service providers and whether he was satisfied with their professional standards and community reputation." Luna looked up from her work, carburetor adjustment forgotten. "They're starting the pressure campaign. Looks that way. Earl's been bringing his personal vehicles here for maintenance for 8 years. But now his boss is suggesting he might want to consider other options for the sake of maintaining appropriate professional boundaries." "What did Earl say?" Steele smiled grimly. Earl told his boss that he'd been satisfied with our work and saw no reason to change providers. But he also said his boss made it clear that Earl's continued employment with Ashworth Industries depends on maintaining their standards of professional association. Luna felt anger building in her chest. Not the hot, impulsive anger of childhood, but the cold, focused anger that came from watching bullies target people she cared about. They're making him choose between his job and his integrity. That's about the size of it, Steele agreed. And Earl's got 2 kids in college and a mortgage. He can't afford to lose his job over principle, no matter how much he wants to do the right thing. Luna set down her tools and wiped her hands on a shop rag, her movements deliberate and controlled. Grandpa Steele, what would my father do in this situation? Steele studied his granddaughter's face, recognizing the determined expression that reminded him so strongly of his son. Your father would gather intelligence, assess his options, and then take whatever action was necessary to protect people who couldn't protect themselves. Even if it was dangerous. Especially if it was dangerous, Steele said. Your father never backed down from a fight when the stakes mattered, but he also never fought without understanding the terrain and having a plan for victory. Luna nodded. Slowly. Then I guess it's time to do some terrain assessment. That afternoon, Luna made a series of phone calls that would have surprised anyone who thought of her primarily as a 12-year-old girl with unusual mechanical skills. She contacted Monica Ashworth to schedule a follow-up meeting about the CPS investigation. She called Detective Dawn Fisher to provide an update on new information about the harassment campaign, and she made one more call to a number she had memorized but never used. Captain Tony Acosta, the Marine recruiter who had known her father. Captain Acosta, she said when the call connected, this is Luna Stafford, Lieutenant Jake Stafford's daughter. I need to ask you about military protocol for dealing with institutional corruption. Luna. Captain Acosta's voice carried surprise and immediate concern. Is everything all right? Are you and your grandfather safe? We're safe for now, Luna said, but we're dealing with some people who are using their power to hurt my family and intimidate our community. I want to handle this the way my father would have handled it, honorably but effectively. Tell me, what's happening? Captain Acosta said, his voice shifting into the mode of a military officer receiving a situation report. Luna provided a concise summary of the events since her encounter with Benedict Ashworth, the CPS investigation, and the corporate pressure campaign targeting local businesses. Captain Acosta listened without interruption, asking only clarifying questions about specific details and timelines. Luna, he said when she finished, what you're describing sounds like systematic intimidation designed to silence opposition through economic coercion. In military terms, it's a form of asymmetric warfare using institutional power instead of physical force. So how do you fight asymmetric warfare? You don't meet superior force with force, Captain Acosta explained. You use intelligence, surprise, and moral authority to neutralize your opponent's advantages. You make their strengths work against them. What does that mean in practical terms? Captain Acosta was quiet for a moment. In practical terms, it means you document everything. You build alliances with people who share your values, and you force your opponents to fight on terrain where their advantages become liabilities. Such as public accountability, Captain Acosta said. Corporate power works best in shadows. It becomes much less effective when subjected to public scrutiny and moral judgment. Luna felt the pieces of her plan beginning to coalesce into something that might actually work. Captain, would you be willing to help me with something that might require some of those asymmetric warfare principles? Luna, your father was one of the finest Marines I ever served with. If his daughter needs help fighting institutional bullies, "Then I'm at your service. What do you need?" As Luna explained her emerging strategy, she felt the presence of her father's rings against her chest, not as symbols of loss, but as reminders of the courage and honor that had shaped her understanding of what it meant to serve something larger than herself. The battle ahead would require all the tactical intelligence her father had died defending, and all the mechanical ingenuity that had become her own form of service to her community. Friday morning was coming, and with it, Benedict Ashworth's weekly legal briefing. Luna intended to make sure it was a briefing he would never forget. Thursday evening found Luna in an unexpected location, sitting in the back seat of Monica Ashworth's sedan as they navigated the evening traffic toward Ashworth Industries' corporate headquarters. The plan that had seemed straightforward in theory was proving considerably more complex in execution, requiring a level of coordination that tested Luna's tactical planning abilities. "I still think this is incredibly risky," Monica said, glancing at Luna in the rearview mirror. Corporate security doesn't typically appreciate unscheduled visits from 12-year-olds, regardless of their reasons. "That's why we're not making an unscheduled visit," Luna replied, studying the building plans that Garrett Powell had discreetly provided. "We're attending a scheduled meeting that just happens to occur at the same time and place as your father's legal briefing." Monica had arranged a legitimate appointment to discuss expanding Ashworth Industries' Employee Family Services program, a meeting that would place her in the administrative wing precisely when Benedict would be receiving his weekly legal update. Luna's presence would be explained as part of Monica's research into innovative youth development programs, a cover story that was technically accurate even if it omitted certain tactical objectives. "Garrett confirmed that my father will be in Conference Room A from 9 to 10, Monica said. "Rhonda Bailey always presents legal matters first, which means she'll be discussing your situation around 9:15. And you're certain your father doesn't know about the harassment campaign?" "I spoke with him yesterday about general corporate policies," Monica said carefully. "His responses suggested complete ignorance about any actions targeting your family. He actually spoke quite positively about his experience meeting you and your grandfather." Luna touched the chain around her neck, feeling the weight of her father's rings beneath her shirt. "Then we give him the information he needs to make an informed decision about what his company is doing in his name." The Ashworth Industries building rose 12 stories above the Pennsylvania landscape, its glass and steel construction reflecting the kind of architectural ambition that declared corporate success to anyone approaching from miles away. Luna had never been inside a building this large or expensive, but she found herself less intimidated than curious about how such spaces affected the people who worked within them. Security screening was surprisingly thorough for a corporate facility, but Monica's employee credentials and Luna's carefully prepared visitor documentation moved them through the process efficiently. Luna noticed that the security guards treated Monica with the careful respect reserved for family members of important executives, polite but watchful, professional but slightly deferential. "The executive offices are on the 11th floor, Monica explained as they rode the elevator upward. "My father's schedule is always tight on Friday mornings, so timing will be critical." Luna nodded, reviewing the sequence of events they had planned with almost military precision. At 9:10, Monica would enter Conference Room A to discuss her family services proposal. At 9:15, when Rhonda Bailey began presenting legal matters, Luna would appear with documentation that would transform a routine briefing into something considerably more significant. The 11th floor hummed. With the quiet efficiency of corporate power, Luna observed the careful choreography of assistants, the hushed conversations in hallways, the way people moved with purpose that seemed almost ritualistic. This was a different world from Stone Harbor's informal rhythms, governed by hierarchies. and protocols that felt alien to someone raised on directness and practical results. "Mr. Ashworth is already in conference," his assistant informed Monica when they arrived. "The legal briefing began a few minutes early today." Luna felt a moment of tactical anxiety. Their timing had assumed strict adherence to the published schedule, but she had learned from Steele that mechanical problems rarely followed theoretical timelines, and successful repairs required adaptation to actual conditions rather than ideal plans. "I'll wait," Monica said smoothly. "Perhaps Luna could observe some of our corporate training materials while we wait for an appropriate moment to join the meeting." The assistant directed them to a small conference room adjacent to the main briefing area, where Luna could hear the muffled sound of voices through the connecting wall. She couldn't make out specific words, but the rhythm of conversation suggested a standard presentation format. One person speaking while others listened and took notes. "Can you hear what they're discussing?" Monica asked quietly. Luna pressed, her ear to the wall, using skills developed from years of diagnosing automotive problems through subtle audio cues. "There's a woman speaking," she whispered. "Sounds formal, like she's reading from prepared notes. And your father asked a question about community relations about 2 minutes ago." Monica checked her watch. "That sounds like Rhonda Bailey starting the legal review. She always begins with routine matters before moving to more sensitive issues." "Which means she's about to discuss the Stafford situation," Luna said, her pulse quickening with anticipation and anxiety. Through the wall, they could hear the conversation becoming more animated. Benedict Ashworth's voice was clearly audible, now asking questions that carried an edge of surprise and growing concern. Luna couldn't make out the specific words, but the tone suggested someone receiving information that contradicted their assumptions about company operations. "Something's wrong," Monica said, her expression shifting from confidence to worry. "My father sounds upset." Luna listened more carefully, trying to distinguish individual voices and emotional content. "There are 3 people talking now," she reported. "Your father, the woman who was presenting, and a man who sounds defensive." "That would be Garrett Powell," Monica said. "If he's sounding defensive, it means my father is asking pointed questions about security protocols." The sound of raised voices filtered through the wall, followed by what appeared to be a heated exchange between Benedict and someone else. Luna couldn't understand the words, but the emotional content was unmistakably confrontational. "I think your father just learned about the harassment campaign," Luna said. Monica stood up abruptly. "We need to go in there now. If my father is getting incomplete or biased information about your situation, our careful planning won't matter." "What about our cover story?" "Forget the cover story," Monica said grimly. "If Rhonda Bailey is trying to manage the narrative about your family, then authenticity is more important than tactics." Luna gathered her documentation, copies of the CPS report, transcripts of Clutch Jenkins' overheard conversations, and character references from Stone Harbor community members. Everything. They needed to present a complete picture of the corporate harassment campaign and its impact on her family. Monica knocked on conference room A's door and entered without waiting for permission, Luna following close behind. The scene inside was exactly what Luna had expected. Benedict Ashworth sitting at the head of a polished conference table, Rhonda Bailey standing beside a presentation screen displaying legal documents, and Garrett Powell occupying a chair that positioned him between the other 2 participants. "Monica!" Benedict looked up in surprise. "What are you doing here?" "Providing context for your legal briefing," Monica replied directly. "Father, I'd like you to meet Luna Grace Stafford, the young woman whose family is being discussed in today's presentation." Rhonda Bailey's expression shifted from professional confidence to barely concealed alarm. "This is highly irregular," she said sharply. "Legal briefings are confidential corporate matters. We cannot have unauthorized persons." "Rhonda," Benedict interrupted, his voice carrying quiet authority. "I think we can make an exception for someone who appears to be the subject of our legal discussion." He turned to Luna with an expression that mixed curiosity with growing comprehension. "Miss Stafford, what brings you to our corporate headquarters?" Luna took a breath, feeling the weight of her father's rings and the responsibility they represented. "Mr. Ashworth, I came to make sure you have accurate information about what your company is doing to my family, because I think you're a decent person who wouldn't approve of these actions if you understood what was really happening." Rhonda Bailey stepped forward. "Mr. Ashworth, I strongly advise against continuing this conversation without legal counsel present. Any statements made could create liability." "Rhonda," Benedict said quietly, "I think I'm capable of having a conversation with a 12-year-old without creating corporate liability." He gestured to a chair across from him. "Please, Miss Stafford, tell me what you think I should know." Luna sat down, placed her documentation on the conference table, and began to speak with the clear, direct honesty that had characterized every important conversation of her life. She explained the CPS investigation, the economic pressure campaign against local businesses, and the systematic effort to isolate her family from community support. "The most important thing you need to understand," Luna concluded, "is that your legal department initiated all of these actions without telling you. They classified my family as a routine risk management issue that could be handled through standard corporate procedures." Benedict turned to Rhonda Bailey, his expression unreadable. "Is this accurate?" Bailey straightened her shoulders defensively. "Mr. Ashworth, we acted within our authorized parameters for managing reputational risks. The Stafford situation posed potential liability concerns that required immediate. The Stafford situation," Benedict repeated slowly, "involved a remarkable young woman who fixed my car when I was stranded and asked for nothing more than fair payment for honest work." He looked back at Luna. "How exactly does that pose a reputational risk to my company?" "Photos of a miner performing industrial work could be misinterpreted by labor activists or competitors," Bailey replied stiffly. "We took proactive measures to prevent potential exploitation of the situation." Luna leaned forward. "Mrs. Bailey, with respect, the only people exploiting this situation are the ones who filed false reports and threatened my grandfather's business to cover up their own embarrassment." Benedict was quiet for a long moment, his attention moving between Luna's documentation and Rhonda Bailey's defensive posture. Finally, he spoke with the measured tone of someone who had reached an important decision. "Rhonda, you're terminated," he said simply. "Garrett, please escort Mrs. Bailey to her office to collect her personal belongings, then ensure she leaves the building." Bailey's face went white. "Mr. Ashworth, you can't be serious. I was protecting the company's interests." "No," Benedict said firmly. "You were protecting your own narrow interpretation of the company's interests. And in doing so, you've damaged our actual interests in ways that will take considerable effort to repair." As Bailey and Powell left the conference room, Benedict turned his full attention to Luna. "Miss Stafford, I owe you and your family a profound apology, and I owe you something more than an apology. I owe you the kind of response that demonstrates my company's actual values rather than the distorted version that Mrs. Bailey was implementing." Luna felt a surge of relief mixed with cautious optimism. "What kind of response?" Benedict smiled for the first time since the meeting had begun. "The kind that turns a corporate mistake into an opportunity for genuine community partnership. But first, I think we need to make some phone calls to correct the immediate damage that's been done." As Benedict reached for his phone to begin the process of undoing the harassment campaign, Luna realized that her tactical planning had succeeded beyond her most optimistic projections. But she also understood that victory in this battle was just the beginning of a larger campaign, one that would test whether corporate power could be redirected toward community service rather than community domination. The first phone call Benedict made was to Earl Patterson's supervisor, a conversation that Luna witnessed with fascination as she observed corporate power being redirected from intimidation to accountability. Benedict's tone was cordial but unmistakably authoritative as he explained that Ashworth Industries' previous guidance regarding professional associations had been issued without proper authorization and was hereby rescinded. Furthermore, Benedict continued, his eyes meeting Luna's across the conference table, I want to make it clear that Ashworth Industries values long-term relationships with reliable local service providers. Mr. Patterson's choice of automotive repair services is entirely his own business, and any employee who suggests otherwise is exceeding their authority. The second call went to Sandra Mitchell at Child Protective Services, where Benedict identified himself and requested an immediate review of the anonymous report filed against the Stafford family. I have reason to believe that report was submitted under false pretenses, he said carefully. I'd like to provide additional information that may be relevant to your investigation. Luna listened as Benedict arranged to have Monica provide a comprehensive assessment of her living situation, Steele's guardianship, and the educational value of her mechanical training. More importantly, he offered to personally testify about his observations of the Stafford family's character and competence. Mr. Ashworth, Luna said when he ended the call, you don't have to do all this. Just stopping the harassment would be enough. Benedict shook his head. Miss Stafford, stopping the harassment addresses the immediate problem, but it doesn't address the underlying question of how my company relates to the communities we operate in. What happened to your family? Suggests that we've lost sight of some fundamental principles. Monica, who had been taking notes throughout her father's phone calls, looked up with an expression of surprised approval. Father, are you talking about changing corporate policy? I'm talking about remembering that corporate success depends on community health, Benedict replied, and that community health depends on supporting people like the Staffords, who contribute skills and values that can't be measured in quarterly reports. Luna felt a growing sense that this conversation was moving beyond her family's immediate situation towards something much larger. What would that mean in practical terms? Benedict leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. It would mean rethinking how we define corporate citizenship. Instead of viewing community relationships as potential liabilities to be managed, we might view them as assets to be cultivated. Such as, Monica prompted, such as partnering with local educational institutions to develop technical training programs, such as supporting small businesses that provide essential services to our employees and their families, such as recognizing that a 12-year-old girl with extraordinary mechanical abilities represents exactly the kind of talent our industry needs to cultivate. Luna felt a mixture of excitement and wariness. Mr. Ashworth, are you offering me some kind of job? Benedict laughed, the first genuinely relaxed sound Luna had heard from him. Miss Stafford, I'm offering you something much more valuable than a job. I'm offering you an opportunity to help design programs that could benefit other young people with technical aptitudes. I'm not sure I understand. Luna, Monica said, leaning forward with enthusiasm, what my father is suggesting is that your experience, both your mechanical abilities and your recent encounter with institutional harassment, makes you uniquely qualified to help develop policies that support rather than suppress exceptional young talent. Benedict nodded. Exactly. Ashworth Industries could establish scholarship programs, apprenticeship opportunities, and community partnerships that recognize and develop technical skills regardless of age or conventional educational credentials. Luna, considered this proposal with the same careful analysis she applied to complex mechanical problems. "And my grandfather? What about our auto repair shop?" "Your grandfather's shop could become a cornerstone of such programs," Benedict said. "A place where young people could learn practical skills from someone who combines technical expertise with genuine commitment to community service." The scope of what Benedict was proposing began to sink in. This wasn't just about repairing the damage done by his legal department. It was about fundamentally reimagining how corporate resources could support rather than exploit community assets. "There's something else you need to consider," Luna said carefully. "If you do this, if you really change how your company operates, there will be people inside and outside Ashworth Industries who won't like it. People who think corporations should focus on profits instead of community development." Benedict studied Luna's face with growing respect. "You're absolutely right. Change always creates resistance, especially change that challenges established power structures. Are you suggesting I should avoid making these changes because they'll be controversial?" "No," Luna replied firmly. "I'm suggesting you should make them because they'll be controversial. My father didn't die fighting for easy causes. He died fighting for principles that were worth the risk." Monica watched this exchange with obvious fascination. "Luna, you sound like you're preparing for another battle." "Maybe I am," Luna said, "because if Mr. Ashworth really wants to change how corporations relate to communities, he's going to need allies who understand that some things are worth fighting for." Benedict stood up and walked to the conference room's window, which offered a panoramic view of the Pennsylvania landscape that included Stone Harbor in the distance. "Miss Stafford, are you offering to be one of those allies?" "I'm offering to help in whatever way I can," Luna said, "but I'm also telling you that real change means accepting some risk and accepting some criticism from people who profit from the current system." "Such as my board of directors," Benedict said wryly. "Such as your board of directors," Luna agreed. "And your shareholders, and your competitors, and probably some of your employees who are comfortable with how things work now." Benedict turned back to face her. "In your opinion, what would convince those people that community-focused policies serve corporate interests rather than undermining them?" Luna thought about this question with the systematic approach Steele had taught her for diagnosing complex problems. "Results," she said finally. "You can't argue with results. If community partnerships actually improve employee satisfaction, reduce turnover costs and generate positive publicity, then the business case becomes obvious. And if they don't produce those results, then you adjust your approach until they do," Luna said with a slight smile. "That's what good mechanics do when their first solution doesn't work. They keep trying until they find something that does work." Benedict returned to his seat with an expression that mixed determination with something approaching relief. "Miss Stafford, I think you've just provided me with both a strategy and a philosophical framework for pursuing it." "What happens next?" Monica asked. "Next, we begin implementing immediate remedies for the damage done to the Stafford family," Benedict said. "And then we begin developing longer-term programs that could serve as models for other corporate community partnerships." Luna felt a surge of optimism tempered by practical awareness of the challenges ahead. "Mr. Ashworth, there's something else you should know. If you're serious about this, you'll need to understand that small-town communities like Stone Harbor operate differently from corporate environments. People here value relationships over transactions, and they can tell the difference between genuine commitment and public relations gestures." "What would genuine commitment look like?" Benedict asked. "It would look like showing up," Luna said simply, "not just for ribbon cuttings and photo opportunities, but for the everyday work of building trust and solving problems. It would look like listening to people who know things you don't know and learning from them instead of trying to manage them. Benedict was quiet for a moment, absorbing the implications of Luna's words. "Miss Stafford, would you be willing to help me learn how to show up appropriately? I think my grandfather would be better qualified to teach you that," Luna said. "But yes, I'll help however I can." As they prepared to leave Ashworth Industries headquarters, Luna realized that her tactical success in confronting corporate harassment had evolved into something much more significant, an opportunity to demonstrate that business success and community service could be mutually reinforcing rather than mutually exclusive. But she also understood that the real work was just beginning. Corporate policies could be changed by executive decision, but cultural transformation required sustained effort from people committed to principles larger than profit margins. It would require the kind of long-term dedication that had characterized her father's military service and her grandfather's community leadership. The drive back to Stone Harbor gave Luna time to process the morning's events and consider their implications for her family's future. She had successfully neutralized the immediate threats to Steele's business and her own living situation. But more importantly, she had opened possibilities for the kind of community development that could benefit people far beyond the Stafford family. As they passed the spot on Route 412, where she had first encountered Benedict Ashworth's broken Rolls-Royce, Luna touched the chain around her neck and felt her father's rings. The mechanical problem that had brought them together had been solved with improvised parts and creative thinking. The larger problems they were now addressing would require the same combination of practical skills and principled determination. But Luna had learned from Steele that the most important repairs were often the ones that prevented future breakdowns rather than simply fixing immediate failures. If Benedict Ashworth was serious about transforming his company's relationship with communities like Stone Harbor, then her family's experience with corporate harassment might serve as the foundation for solutions that could benefit others facing similar challenges. It was, Luna reflected, exactly the kind of service her father would have approved of, using whatever skills and opportunities were available to make the world a little more just for people who deserved better than they were getting. 2 weeks after the confrontation, at Ashworth Industries, Stone Harbor was buzzing with the kind of purposeful energy that comes when a community discovers it has more power than it realized. The news of Rhonda Bailey's termination and Benedict Ashworth's corporate policy reversals had spread through local networks with the speed of a well-tuned engine, generating conversations that extended far beyond the immediate circumstances of Luna's family. Luna stood in the middle of what had once been an empty warehouse on the outskirts of town, watching as contractors installed electrical systems and ventilation equipment under Steele's careful supervision. The space would soon become the Stone Harbor Technical Training Center, a partnership between Ashworth Industries and local educational institutions that would offer hands-on learning opportunities for young people interested in mechanical and technical trades. The electrical rough-in is ahead of schedule, Steele reported, approaching Luna with a clipboard and wearing the satisfied expression of someone watching a complex project come together properly. Benedict's contractor coordinator knows his business. Luna nodded, still amazed by the speed with which corporate resources could be mobilized when guided by clear purpose. What about the equipment orders? First shipment arrives next week, Steele said. Engine simulators, diagnostic computers, and enough hand tools to outfit 20 students. Plus, Benedict insisted on safety equipment that exceeds OSHA standards for professional shops. The training center represented more than just educational opportunity. It embodied a new model for corporate community partnership that had attracted attention from business leaders and social policy advocates throughout Pennsylvania. Luna had spent the past week fielding phone calls from reporters, education officials, and other CEOs interested in replicating the Stone Harbor approach in their own communities. "Any word from the CPS investigation?" Luna asked, though she was increasingly confident that Sandra Mitchell's review would conclude with case closure. "Monica called this morning," Steele replied. "Mitchell's final report recommends case dismissal with commendation for our family structure and educational approach. Apparently, Dr. Bishop's medical documentation and Benedict's character testimony were pretty convincing." Luna felt a weight lift from her shoulders that she hadn't fully acknowledged carrying. The threat of separation from Steele had been more frightening than she had allowed herself to admit, and its resolution freed her to focus entirely on the positive opportunities emerging from their experience. "There's something else," Steele continued. "Captain Acosta called to say he's been in touch with some Marine Corps recruitment officials about your technical abilities. They're interested in discussing advanced placement opportunities when you're old enough to consider military service." Luna touched her father's rings through her shirt, feeling their familiar weight with new understanding. "What kind of opportunities?" "Engineering and technical specialties that could use someone with your intuitive understanding of mechanical systems," Steele explained. "But that's years away, and you'd have other options by then." "Other options?" Steele gestured toward the construction activity surrounding them. "Luna, what we're building here is just the beginning. If this training center succeeds, it could serve as a model for similar programs across the country. Someone with your combination of technical skills and community leadership abilities could have considerable influence on how such programs develop." Luna considered this possibility with the same analytical approach she applied to mechanical problems. "You think I should consider staying in civilian life instead of enlisting? I think you should consider all your options when the time comes," Steele said carefully. "Your father chose military service because it was the best way for him to serve his country at that time. Your service might take a different form, but it would be just as valuable." Before Luna could respond, the sound of vehicles approaching drew their attention to the warehouse entrance. Benedict Ashworth's familiar Rolls-Royce was followed by a convoy of cars carrying what appeared to be a delegation of business and government officials. "Looks like the site visit is starting," Steele observed. Luna watched as Benedict emerged from his car, accompanied by Pennsylvania's Deputy Secretary of Labor, 2 members of the state legislature, and several executives from companies interested in developing similar community partnerships. The delegation had been organized to assess the Stone Harbor project's potential for statewide replication. "Mr. Stafford, Miss Stafford," Benedict called as he approached with his entourage. "Thank you for accommodating this inspection on short notice." "Our pleasure," Steele replied, extending his hand to the Deputy Secretary. "Steele Stafford, and this is my granddaughter Luna, who originated many of the ideas we're implementing here." Luna found herself the focus of attention from people accustomed to wielding significant authority, but she felt comfortable with their scrutiny. Her experience confronting corporate power had taught her that impressive titles didn't necessarily indicate superior understanding, and that respectful confidence was more effective than deference. "Miss Stafford," the Deputy Secretary said, "Mr. Ashworth has told us quite a lot about your mechanical abilities and your insights into technical education. Would you mind showing us around the facility?" For the next hour, Luna guided the delegation through the training center, explaining the pedagogical philosophy behind the equipment selections and facility design. She described how hands-on learning could complement traditional academic instruction, how safety protocols could be integrated into every aspect of technical training, and how community partnerships could provide real-world experience that textbooks couldn't deliver. "The key insight," Luna explained as they examined the engine simulation bay, is that young people learn differently when they can see immediate practical applications for abstract concepts. Mathematical principles become relevant when you're calculating gear ratios. Physics becomes interesting when you're understanding how torque and leverage work in actual mechanical systems. State Representative Patricia Hendricks, who had been taking detailed notes throughout the tour, looked up with obvious interest. Miss Stafford, have you considered that your approach could apply to other technical fields beyond automotive repair? Absolutely, Luna replied. The same principles would work for electrical systems, computer programming, manufacturing processes, or any field where theoretical knowledge needs to be applied to practical problems. What would it take to expand this model to other communities? Asked Dr. Robert Chen, the state's director of workforce development. Luna glanced at Steele, who nodded encouragingly. It would take corporate partners willing to invest in long-term community development rather than short-term profit maximization, she said. And it would take local leaders who understand that effective education requires relationships, not just resources. Benedict stepped forward. If I may add to Miss Stafford's observation, it would also require a fundamental shift in how we measure corporate success. Traditional metrics focus on quarterly earnings and shareholder returns. Community partnership models require longer-term perspectives and broader definitions of value creation. Deputy Secretary Martinez looked around the bustling construction site with obvious approval. Mr. Ashworth, what has this project cost your company, and what kind of return on investment do you anticipate? The initial investment is approximately $2 million, Benedict replied. As for return on investment, we're tracking employee satisfaction, community relations, recruitment effectiveness, and brand reputation. Early indicators suggest significant positive returns in all categories. But the most important return, Luna added, isn't financial. It's the knowledge that we're helping young people develop skills and confidence that will serve them throughout their lives. Representative Hendricks smiled. Miss Stafford, you sound like someone who's thought seriously about public policy. Implications. I've thought seriously about what it means to serve your community, Luna corrected gently. Public policy is just one way to do that. After the delegation departed, Luna found herself alone with Benedict in the training center's future classroom space. The afternoon sunlight streaming through new windows illuminated dust motes dancing in the air, creating an atmosphere of potential and possibility. Luna, Benedict said, I want you to know that this project has changed more than just corporate policy for me. It's changed how I think about success, responsibility, and the kind of legacy I want to leave. What kind of legacy is that? Luna asked. The kind that demonstrates that business success and community service aren't mutually exclusive, Benedict replied. The kind that shows other corporate leaders that investing in people and places can be more rewarding than maximizing quarterly profits. Luna nodded, understanding that Benedict's transformation represented something larger than individual character development. And if other companies follow your example, then maybe we can create an economy that serves communities instead of exploiting them, Benedict said. An economy that recognizes that the real source of wealth is human creativity and collaboration. Luna looked around the emerging training center, imagining the young people who would soon be learning practical skills in this space, developing confidence and competence that would serve them throughout their lives. Mr. Ashworth, do you think this will really work? Not just here in Stone Harbor, but as a model for other places? Benedict considered the question with obvious seriousness. I think it will work if enough people like you and your grandfather are willing to invest their time and expertise in making it work. Corporate resources can provide facilities and equipment, But only community commitment can create the relationships that make education meaningful. "And then I guess we'd better make sure it succeeds," Luna said. As evening approached and the construction crews finished their work for the day, Luna stood outside the training center with Steele, watching the sun set over Stone Harbor. The town looked the same as it had before her encounter with Benedict Ashworth, but she knew that important changes were beginning beneath the surface, changes that could benefit not just her community, but others facing similar challenges. "Grandpa Steele," she said, "do you think my father would approve of what we're doing here?" Steele put his arm around Luna's shoulders, his voice carrying the quiet pride of someone who had witnessed courage rewarded with opportunity. "Luna, your father fought to defend the principles this project represents, the idea that everyone deserves a chance to develop their abilities and contribute to something larger than themselves. I think he'd be proud of how you've turned a moment of crisis into an opportunity for service." Luna touched her father's rings one more time, feeling their weight not as a burden of loss, but as a reminder of purpose. The mechanical problem that had brought her family into contact with corporate power had been solved weeks ago, but the larger work of building just and sustainable communities was just beginning. It was work that would require the same combination of technical skill, moral courage, and community commitment that had guided her through the recent crisis. But it was also work that offered the possibility of creating the kind of world her father had died defending, a world where talent was recognized regardless of its source, where power served justice rather than self-interest, and where young people could dream of futures limited only by their willingness to serve others. 6 months later, Luna stood before a packed auditorium at the Pennsylvania State Capitol, addressing the Senate Education Committee about the unexpected success of technical training programs that bridged corporate resources with community expertise. At 13 now, she had grown taller and more confident, but her hands still carried the honest stains of someone who spent her afternoons working with engines and her evenings planning curricula that could transform how young people prepared for technical careers. "Senators," she began, her voice carrying across the chamber with the clarity that came from speaking truths she had lived. "The Stone Harbor Technical Training Center has exceeded every projected outcome because it was built on a simple principle. Young people learn best when they can see the immediate relevance of their education to their lives and their communities." Senator William Hayes, the committee chairman, leaned forward with obvious interest. "Ms. Stafford, can you give us specific examples of these outcomes?" "Certainly," Luna replied, referring to notes that reflected months of careful documentation. "We've had 18 students complete our first automotive technology program. 16 are now employed in technical positions throughout Pennsylvania, and 2 have started their own repair businesses. More importantly, our safety record is 0 accidents in over 4,000 hours of hands-on training." The statistics represented more than bureaucratic success. They represented young lives redirected toward productive purposes and communities strengthened by skilled workers who understood both technical competence and social responsibility. Luna had watched shy teenagers transform into confident technicians, had seen academic underachievers discover intellectual abilities they hadn't known they possessed. "What makes your program different from traditional vocational education?" asked Senator Maria Rodriguez, who represented a district struggling with youth unemployment and industrial decline. "Integration," Luna answered without hesitation. "We don't separate academic learning from practical application. Students learn mathematics through gear ratio calculations, physics through understanding torque and leverage, chemistry through analyzing fuel combustion and emission systems. But most importantly, they learn these concepts while solving real problems for real people in their community." Benedict Ashworth, seated in the gallery, watched Luna's testimony with the pride of someone whose initial skepticism had been transformed. into profound respect. The past 6 months had taught him that corporate success could indeed be measured by community impact, and that Luna's insights into technical education had implications far beyond automotive repair. Miss Stafford, Senator Hayes continued, we understand that your program has attracted interest from other states. Can you tell us about expansion plans? Luna glanced briefly at Steele, who sat beside Benedict in the gallery, then returned her attention to the committee. We've received inquiries from communities in Ohio, West Virginia, and North Carolina about developing similar programs. But expansion requires more than just replicating our physical facilities. It requires corporate partners who understand that long-term community investment creates sustainable business advantages, such as, prompted Senator Rodriguez, such as reduced employee turnover, improved community relations, enhanced recruitment capabilities, and the kind of brand reputation that attracts customers who value corporate citizenship, Luna replied. But the most important advantage is access to a workforce that combines technical skills with community commitment. Senator Hayes nodded approvingly. Miss Stafford, what role do you see for state government in supporting these community corporate partnerships? Luna had anticipated this question, and her answer reflected months of discussion with Steele, Benedict, and Monica about the policy implications of their work. State government can provide regulatory frameworks that encourage rather than obstruct innovative educational approaches. It can offer tax incentives for corporations that make genuine long-term investments in community development, and it can help coordinate between communities that want to develop similar programs. But, she continued, state government cannot substitute for local leadership and corporate commitment. The most important ingredients in successful programs are people who care more about long-term community health than short-term political or financial advantages. After her testimony, Luna joined Steele and Benedict for lunch at a small restaurant near the state capitol, where they could reflect on the morning's proceedings and discuss the implications of growing political support for technical education reform. You handled their questions beautifully, Benedict said, cutting into a sandwich with the methodical precision Luna had come to associate with his approach to complex problems. Particularly the questions about state government's role. You managed to express support for their involvement without suggesting that bureaucratic solutions could replace community initiative. That's because bureaucratic solutions can't replace community initiative, Luna replied simply. They can support it or obstruct it, but they can't create it. Steele smiled at his granddaughter's directness. Luna's learned that lesson from watching Stone Harbor operate for 13 years. People here take care of each other because it's the right thing to do, not because government programs require it. Which raises an interesting question, Benedict said thoughtfully. As our program expands to other communities, how do we maintain that spirit of voluntary cooperation while working within larger institutional frameworks? Luna considered the question while watching pedestrians navigate the busy sidewalk outside the restaurant window. Most of them looked like state government employees, well-dressed, purposeful, accustomed to working within complex bureaucratic systems that often seemed disconnected from the practical concerns of small-town communities. I think, she said carefully, we maintain it by insisting that community people remain in control of their own programs. Corporations can provide resources and government can provide support, but local communities have to make the decisions about how those resources get used. That could be politically complicated, Benedict observed. Government officials and corporate executives are accustomed to controlling the programs they fund. Then they need to learn a different way of operating, Luna said with quiet firmness. Because programs that work require trust, and trust requires letting people have real authority over their own lives. Benedict laughed. Luna, you continue to challenge my assumptions about how business and government should operate. 6 months ago, I would have considered your approach naive. Now I'm beginning to think it might be the only approach that actually works. That evening, Luna found herself in an unexpected location, the banquet hall of Harrisburg's most prestigious hotel, attending a reception for business leaders and government officials interested in workforce development initiatives. She wore her best dress and her father's rings on their familiar chain, feeling simultaneously honored to be included and slightly overwhelmed by the formal atmosphere. Miss Stafford approached a woman Luna recognized as the CEO of a major manufacturing company. I wanted to thank you for your testimony today. Your insights about community corporate partnerships have given me some new ideas about how our company might better serve the regions where we operate. Similar conversations filled the evening as Luna moved through clusters of influential people who had previously existed only as names in newspaper articles. She discovered that many corporate leaders were genuinely interested in community development, but lacked practical knowledge about how to build authentic partnerships rather than superficial public relations gestures. The key, Luna found herself explaining repeatedly, is to approach communities as partners rather than as markets to be managed. People can tell the difference between genuine respect and corporate marketing. Near the end of the reception, Luna was approached by Captain Tony Acosta, who had driven from his recruiting station to attend the event. "Luna," he said, "I wanted you to know that Marine Corps leadership has been following your work with considerable interest." "Oh?" Luna replied, uncertain about the implications of military attention. "Your combination of technical expertise and community leadership represents exactly the kind of abilities we need in our engineering and logistics specialties," Captain Acosta explained. "When you're ready to consider military service, you'll have opportunities that reflect your unique qualifications." Luna touched her father's rings through her dress. "Captain, I appreciate the interest, but I'm not sure yet what form my service will take." "I understand," Captain Acosta said, "but I want you to know that military service offers ways to apply your skills to challenges that extend far beyond any single community. The principles you've learned in Stone Harbor could benefit people around the world." As the reception concluded, and Luna prepared to return to Stone Harbor, she reflected on the day's events and their implications for her understanding of service and responsibility. Her testimony to the Senate committee had articulated principles learned through personal experience with corporate power and community resilience. But the conversations at the reception had revealed opportunities for applying those principles on scales she had never considered. The drive back to Stone Harbor took them through rural Pennsylvania landscapes that reminded Luna of why she valued small-town life. These were communities where people knew their neighbors, where individual actions had visible consequences, where young people could see direct connections between their efforts and their community's welfare. "Grandpa Steele," she said, as they passed familiar landmarks, "do you think I should consider working in government or corporate leadership instead of enlisting in the Marines?" Steele was quiet for several miles before responding. "Luna, your father chose military service because it offered him the best opportunity to serve something larger than himself. Your opportunities might be different, but the principle remains the same. Choose the path that lets you make the biggest positive difference in the world. And if I'm not sure which path that is, then you keep learning and growing until the answer becomes clear," Steele said. "But whatever you choose, make sure it honors the values your father died defending." As they entered Stone Harbor's familiar streets, Luna saw the Technical Training Center's lights still burning, where Alejandro was teaching an evening class. In diesel engine repair to a group of adult learners seeking career transitions, the sight reminded her that her family's encounter with corporate harassment had evolved into something much larger, a demonstration that individual courage could create institutional change when guided by principles larger than personal advantage. Luna understood now that her future service, whether military or civilian, would be shaped by the lessons learned during these past months. She had discovered that technical skills could serve social justice, that individual action could influence corporate behavior, and that small communities could model solutions for larger societal challenges. More importantly, she had learned that her father's legacy wasn't defined by his death, but by the principles that had guided his life, principles that continued to inspire courage, service, and hope in people who had never met him, but who benefited from the values he had died defending. As Luna prepared for bed that night in the apartment above Stafford's auto repair, she held her father's rings and felt their familiar weight with new understanding. They weren't just symbols of loss, they were reminders of purpose, connections to a tradition of service that extended beyond individual lives to encompass the communities and principles worth defending. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new opportunities to apply the lessons learned through confronting corporate power with community courage. But tonight, Luna felt the quiet satisfaction of someone who had discovered that the most important repairs weren't mechanical. They were the ones that fixed broken relationships between power and justice, between individual ability and collective responsibility, between corporate success and community welfare. Her father would have been proud. The end. Up next, 2 more incredible stories are waiting for you right on your screen. If you enjoyed this one, you won't want to miss this. Just click to watch. And don't forget to subscribe. It would mean a lot.